Hello, and thank you very much for having me on tonight. As Scott said, I met him in Edinburgh last year when I did a talk at the university. And I got invited up there because I've been working with Sam, who wrote Be More Pirate, for about a year and a half now. And my job was really to understand some of the reaction, the big reaction that he'd had to the book, and to find out what all these rebellions that people were starting really meant. And the result of that has been that we have now pretty much finished writing a follow-up book called How to Be More Pirate. So a lot of the stuff in tonight's talk is going to be about that. But first, more important things. How the hell are you all? Because it's a funny time. And I don't know about you, but this has been really, really up and down for me. This has pretty much been my month. I don't know about you. Or to put it into sort of pirate visual terminology, it's been a bit like this kind of ongoing GIF, like of the ship over the waves, riding all the uncertainty. And I want to say something about this in relation to the kind of spirit of tonight, because it is really difficult to know where to turn at the moment. And I'm going to be asking you some questions throughout the session. But it can be quite difficult to answer questions and to make decisions when you don't really know what's going to happen next week or next month or 6 months down the line, and all your plans are starting to sort of disintegrate. So people always ask me, well, what would a pirate do? And so a really quick story. As I said, I met Scott and Seth and everyone at the event in Edinburgh. And about a week after I did that talk, I got an email from a woman, and she said this. She said, I was at your presentation last Monday night, and I've been meaning to message you ever since. Loved your honest delivery and so into the ethos of the book. I'd handed in my notice at work and was being guilted into staying. I took a photo of your presentation graphic, the one at the start that scrolls through words quickly, and it landed on Be More Ruthless. So I've stuck firmly to my plans, and they start in 2020. So this is really the power in Be More Pirate. And I've seen this over and over again. This moment when it seems to facilitate a decision where people start to listen to themselves and decide that they're no longer going to take instruction from an outside source, whether it's a person, whether it's the rules, and they kind of undergo this inner rebellion. And I've realized that this is a really, really important moment. So what I want from you tonight to answer the questions is for you to listen to yourself and to listen to your instincts, because when all the goalposts are changing, that's really what we need to do. And this is a passage that I really like from Be More Pirate. We need to evolve the notion of the feeling in our gut from sounding like some kind of last-ditch reassurance to recognize that in an experienced individual, a sharpened and honed instinct is amongst our most valuable of resources. And that's kind of where Jill ended up. And so the first question that I want to ask to you, and I'm going to put a type form into the chat box in a minute. And I'm going to ask you to answer questions as we go into the type form. And at the end, I will send you your answer to all the questions, and as a reminder of what your gut is really telling you. So every time you see the chin scratching pirate in the bottom left-hand corner, who's definitely overthinking everything, that is your signal to answer a question. So I am just going to add that now, if I can. I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a moment so that we can do that. So there is your type form in the chat. Please answer the first question, the first two questions, which is, what is your name? And how are you today? How are you specifically today? Because it's going to change. And this is just a way to capture the moment. And I'm going to give you like 30 seconds because all of these answers are meant to be totally gut instinct responses. So you literally get 30 seconds, and then I will be sharing my screen again.
Just Alex, were you posting something into the chat?
It's just
there it is.
in there.
Okay.
Sorry, I
That's
realized
okay.
it was on private. There you go. So it's in there now.
It's purple. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Yes, it's nice and bright, so you can see. So if you can put your answers into that form, I'd suggest opening it in a new tab and keeping it open throughout. Is everybody okay with that? I'm just going to do a quick, just put your thumbs up if that's all, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. Right. Moving on. So, that's not, this is a slide that I have been holding up for about a year in presentations now, and it feels like it keeps on getting more true. And I usually say alongside this that the only certainty is uncertainty. But usually I have to, it's a bit of a stretch for people's imagination to sort of consider that. So I usually add a couple more slides about some of the big game-changing challenges on the horizon. Might be throw in the potential of ice-free Arctic summer in 2030, or even the, as NASA has described it, the fire-breathing clouds that emerged over the wildfires in Australia earlier in the year, which feel a bit more like Game of Thrones than anything else. But these are potential realities that we face. But obviously now I don't have to include those because we are in this moment, and a lot of us have seen some very odd scenes over the last 6 weeks. This was pretty common back in early March down in Brixton where I live. And it feels like we're being held up a bit of a mirror. Although we've kind of gone past the initial survival mode of all these empty supermarket shelves, we're kind of now in this moment of reflection where we're being asked, you know, what really matters here? And whilst shit has gotten definitely very real, shit has also got possible. More than ever before, we've seen that we actually can really adapt quickly to changing circumstances. We've realised that maybe we're putting economic value in the wrong places. And we've also realised that maybe we could reorganise society. Maybe that's actually possible. And a lot of the stuff we've been told was impossible, maybe isn't. So we're in this pause and this stopgap where we really do have an opportunity to start to rewrite some rules. And so my challenge really to you tonight is to reconsider what you think is really possible here and to be a bit more ambitious about what you would like to change. And so the second question I have for you is, for the type form, what is your greatest hope right now for the world, or maybe just for yourself or your family or your team? Is there a crack in which you can see some hope? So I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to just add that in.
Could you retype the type form? I've just admitted a couple of people in.
Yeah,
who probably want to use the link.
Yeah, I'll just there we go. Just do it one at a time. Okay. So moving on, the thing that Sam and I have heard the most throughout these last 2 weeks is we need pirates. We need more pirates. We've heard it more than ever. And so I just want to quickly talk a bit about what we mean by pirates, because as Scott said, he gave you a bit of a definition at the beginning, but I'm going to delve back into the history a little bit and explain why we have, and why Sam has in Be More Pirate, reframed pirates as heroes, and why they've provided such groundwork for building our movement. So this is a common phrase back in the 1600s. Those who would go to sea for pleasure would go to hell as a pastime. And basically, that just means that it was pretty horrendous at sea. 40% of sailors died on any voyage. It was so bad that press gangs would go around London and harangue people. They'd pretty much be beating men onto ships. Kidnap was not uncommon. And most pirates were originally sailors in the Navy, highly skilled sailors, and they just had enough. Popular culture would have you believe that pirates were inherently greedier, more violent, had more bloodlust than anyone else, and that's why they became pirates. That's become the popular myth. But actually, that's not true at all. Pirates kind of started simply by giving themselves permission to be less miserable. That's my sort of definition of why someone would become a pirate. Pirates were, just a group of sort of disenfranchised young professionals who wanted something better for themselves. And so they kind of went off and formed crews of their own. And this is where it got really interesting and where you started to see some really, really innovative behaviors. So I'm going to quickly share with you a little bit about what's interesting, the most interesting points about pirates. On a pirate ship was where you saw the first form of social insurance. Instead of being left for dead, as you would have been in the Navy, you were compensated. If you lost a leg, you would get 8 pieces of 8 or something like that. Pirates had the first form of dual governance, so they knew that power would corrupt, so they split power. The captain and the quartermaster were equals. The captain is in charge of the strategy, and the quartermaster is in charge of the culture. Now, even more than that, the quartermaster was specifically in charge of dishing out punishment and dishing out the booty. And that was because those are the two things that were most likely to be abused by the captain. Pirates had, universal suffrage. They were really, really democratic. Everybody had a say on all the rules that were created, the code, which we'll get to. Pirates had pay equality, relatively speaking. The captain pretty much got usually between 2 and 4 times as much as the average crew member, which is obviously quite different to what you see today when you see sort of CEOs still receiving hundreds more than the average worker. And they did this because they knew they created rules to stop mutiny. So money was one of the main reasons why conflict would break out. So it was all about preventing that from happening. Pirates had genuinely diverse teams. On the far right here, you'll see a depiction of a female pirate. I don't think this is Anne Bonny, who is the most famous female pirate captain, but Anne Bonny and Mary Read were the two. And this is an artist's interpretation, although she did often go topless. And to her left is Black Caesar, who was one of the very many black pirate captains, originally an African tribal chief, who was then freed taken as a slave and then freed by pirates, because pirates did regularly free slaves in the latter half of the golden age of piracy. I've gone back. Oh, wrong way. Pirates had self-organizing teams. They had relatively flat structures, but they were also really, really good at collaboration. So when they wanted to fight a really big battle, they would team up with other pirate crews, and then they would scale back down, which made them really, really dynamic. And pirates were also masters at marketing. We often think that the Jolly Roger is the Coca-Cola is the world's first brand, but we always say it's the Jolly Roger. Not officially a brand, but it has endured. So when you saw the skull and crossbones on the horizon, you just knew to stay well back. Surrender or die is a pretty strong tagline. And it was also the reason that enabled pirates to be less violent. So I know Scott said at the start that pirates, we're not going to talk about the violent aspect of pirates, but it is worth touching upon this because pirates actively avoided getting into battle. They created a reputation that was so fierce that people automatically surrendered, and that was the power in the brand. And the next one always gets me as the most surprising. Pirates even had a form of same-sex marriage. Not only did they have that, it was so sophisticated that they had an inheritance clause. So if your spouse died, you would actually get their share of the booty. And finally, pirates invented the cocktail. This is a slightly dubious fact because the first record of rum and sugar and mint and water being mixed together was on Francis Drake's ship. And he kind of flitted between being a proper pirate and being a privateer. But nevertheless, we'll stick to it. The alternative was really crap 2% grog. But the point, I guess, about all of these innovations that pirates came up with was that they didn't set out to try and change the world. They simply wanted to change their world. They wanted to design rules that worked for them. Pirates actually sort of put themselves first because they knew that in order to stand up to power, you first have to reclaim power for yourself. And that's something that I've noticed in seeing people in our network start to gain power and start to stand up and challenge things. But I don't think that we do it often enough. I don't think that we know what it is that gives us power. I don't think that we tap into the sources of energy and inspiration that are available to us often. And this is, I think, quite an important thing to do now that we're in this lockdown period where we've got the opportunity to really reflect. At least some of us have. So the next question I want to ask you is, what are you going to do for yourself? So I want to give you a couple of minutes, and I'll put the type form back in the chat. Okay, that's long enough. Good. So all of the new rules that pirates created were locked down in the pirate code. The code was, in fact, a real written document. It was how they formed their governance. The pirate code was usually a series of 5 to 10 articles that explained how pirates would work together. The interesting thing about the articles was that they had to be voted on unanimously. So this is really about instilling the kind of democracy that pirates had. Even if one person disagreed, it wouldn't go in. And again, this is just to prevent mutiny. But interestingly, pirate codes were really more like rules about rules. So they were a way of deciding how to split the money, or a way of deciding how to make decisions. So they weren't just about like, you do this or you do that. And they were really, really consistent across pirate crews, which is why you might often hear of it as just the pirate code, because so many of the articles repeated across different crews. However, there were some outliers too. And again, touching on Scott's point at the beginning about the violence, this is a genuine article from the code of Captain John Phillips. If any time we meet with a prudent woman, that man that offers to meddle her without her consent shall suffer present death. And this is an article in a pirate code that says that rape is punishable by death. So in many ways, pirates yet again prove themselves to be well ahead of the curve. But the more interesting thing that I want to get to is that we started to receive modern pirate codes. The first time Sam got one, he was genuinely really shocked. Because he thought, well, what relevance could an ancient pirate code have to today? And yet people started creating them. And part of my job in writing this book has really been to understand how useful a pirate code is in modern organizational culture. And I guess the main point that I've come to is this. To summarize, a code builds culture explicitly by closing the gap between intention and action. And what I really mean by that is that a lot of the time we build culture accidentally. We tend to have this kind of soup of brand values or policies, or sometimes we have organizational values, but it's really, really rare that those are created by all the people who are on the receiving end of them. Most of the time they're created by just a few people within an organization, and policies tend to be sort of shoved in a drawer somewhere. And a lot of the kind of values that you see tend to be quite generic. So a code is quite different. It's something that is almost alive within the organization. So we started to receive some pirate codes, and I started to understand what was really useful about them. One of the first ones was this one that was sent to us by a guy called Robbie, who had spent 20 years working in advertising. And in 2018, he decided to set up his own agency. And so he got his small, newly formed team together, and they created these 5 principles as what they wanted to underpin the culture as they went on. And the first most important thing was that they felt timeless. So they needed something that was going to help them navigate, even if the circumstances change. So the idea would be that even in coronavirus days, these principles would help them make decisions. The second point about having principles rather than kind of do's and don'ts for your company is that it creates trust. So by saying to people, we've got these principles we adhere to, you essentially give them the trust to interpret those principles within whatever context they're working, rather than giving them direct instructions again. And I guess the third point is about a good article in a code is that it needs to contain some level of opinion. And Robbie's written a few more sort of sentences that follow up on his principles. And they quite expressly state his opinions and views on the world. Because if you just have principles that, don't really say anything, then you don't really stand for anything. Quite often I see brand values that say things like, we stand for excellence, or we are professional. And frankly, that could just be anybody. So the idea is that they should be in some way disputable. The next step of code building is to actually test out your code in real life scenarios. So this is a code that was created by a crew that I like to call the MCC pirates. Well, I don't call them, they call themselves that. They're led by a woman called Kath, and it's a small group that works within a big public sector organization. So it's quite a bureaucratic environment. And they really wanted to try and challenge some of the culture. So they created their 4 principles in their code and decided to focus on the last one. And they thought about how does this principle play out in the reality of our day-to-day work? And they realized that whilst they all really, really valued having courage and challenging conversations, they didn't feel that they were actually very good at it, or that some people were much better at it than others. So they decided to not to abandon the principle, but to make it their first action as a group to start practicing. They said, if this is what we stand for, then we need to get better at it. So we're actually going to hold sessions where we practice having more uncomfortable, more and inviting in more conflict. And I guess the final point I want to make about codes is that they've got to be motivating, they've got to inspire you. Now, Sam's done some work with, over the last couple of years with Mercedes-Benz, which I know doesn't sound very pirate, but he's worked specifically with the marketing team in Mercedes-Benz Vans, subsection of Mercedes, and they are actually quite pirate. And after a couple of sessions, they created their code. Now, it is quite difficult for them to really start to change the rules of the business quickly, because it's, you know, a huge global, very bureaucratic corporation. So what they started with was something that just felt inspiring to them, something that felt that that would really help them believe that they could change, something that felt ambitious to them. And this line, "It starts with us," was the first line of their code, because it was the thing that felt most emotive. And that is a really, really important thing to include. So in summary, 21st century pirate codes. This is what I have learnt, that they should be simple, timeless principles. They should create trust. They should contain some opinion to help you make real world decisions, and be emotive and inspiring, and set your ambition. So my next question, my next question isn't a question. We are now at the breakout room point. So I will stop sharing and tell you that the question I'd like you to consider in the breakout rooms is, if we are in this moment where we have an opportunity to start to rewrite some rules, what values and what principles do we want to embed, whether it's in our organizations, or maybe just our families, or the wider world? What kind of principles should we now be setting as we kind of veer into this idea of a new normal? So that is my challenge. What would be the post-COVID pirate code?
Just on that, I know we like to give everyone an option to, you know, be involved. You will be, Babs is going to put you into a room. If you don't want to go into that room for whatever reason, that's perfectly fine, and you can just stay in the main area, and the hosts will be there. We hope you do go in the rooms, and hope you do have fun. If you're in a room and you feel uncomfortable, just come out. If you want any of us to come in and help, we'll come in and help as well. So we just want everyone to have a great experience. Do you want to repeat the question again? Because I've talked, and that'll have kind of tuned them out. What was the question again, Alex?
The question is, what might be some of the values and principles that we might want to put into a post-COVID world pirate code? How should we navigate the new world, basically? I'll add.
And we're in the room for how long? 10 minutes?
10 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, I would suggest start by introducing yourself.
I won't share it.
Okay, ready to rock and roll in the teams? In the breakout rooms?
Make it so, number one.
Cool. Oh, Alex disappeared as well.
Ah, well, that's fun.
I couldn't get anyone, wouldn't give me the opportunity to do it automatically, so I just had to assign people to it. It was like,
yeah, yeah.
I'm going to pause the recording while everyone is in the breakout rooms.
Okay.
I see the stars come out tonight. Why aren't we listening to Pirate? Oh, there.
Or Norse thrash metal. a roving, the roving's been my ruin. Sea shanties. Why don't we do sea shanties, Alex?
I don't know any sea shanties, but
I bet you do.
So,
in Amsterdam, there lives a maid, Mark. Well, what I do say? Amsterdam, there lives a maid, and she be mistress afraid. And we'll leave it there. Because she's self-employed, and that's
okay,
fine.
So I'd suggest now put yourself on gallery view, if you're open to it. No, I'm kidding. I'd just be interested to know, did anyone come up with anything interesting that they thought they would like to share?
We had one in ours. somebody said, anything is possible. And I really quite like that, because we talked about, you know, we're in a period where there's uncertainty and we don't really know what's coming next. And, you know, I think we should feel empowered to be bold and courageous and, you know, be the best we can be and, you know, come out this other side. And we see a lot of creativity at times like this. So, yeah, I thought that was good. Somebody said, yeah, anything is possible. I like that.
I think from the group that I was in, one of the big themes that we had was hoping that we could come out with a similar sense of community and value for people who maybe haven't been valued before, but you know, you can see how important various people are across society, and if we can all sort of retain something of that and a sense of us all being in it together and wanting to improve everybody's lives instead of the more kind of selfish view that we quite often have.
Yeah. Can I just say, if you're not speaking, perhaps put mute on, because there's a bit of background. Great. So if you want to speak, unmute yourself. Go for it.
Yeah, Peter, also that came up in our group as well, like this whole concept of just value everyone. Would be lovely to see.
Mm.
So that seems to be a theme, because that came up in our group too, about the sort of a more of a balance between delivery and value, rather than the inequality we see already.
Yeah.
An interesting one that came up in ours, and again, it's a bit of a can of worms, was about encouraging critical thinking and debate. The world we're in now, perhaps there's not enough of it. Post-truth world, whatever you want to call it. But we certainly thought that was a thing that we need a lot more of at this stage.
Yeah, agree. Completely agree. Okay.
In our group, we talked about respect. I started with respect for people, respect for nature, respect for the environment. And it'd be brilliant if a post-COVID world had, you know, so much respect shared around equally. And we said, at least there is now more respect for, say, key workers. People understand how important they are to our community.
Yeah. Another one that came up in ours was about being slow. Do we want to? And for me, I sort of expanded it to slow travel, because I feel really conflicted about losing some of the travel element, but appreciating that, you know, it's good that we're not flying as much, but also wondering how we can do exploration more slowly. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, I'll move on. Few other suggestions in the chat, which is great. But otherwise, I shall move us on. So thank you for your post-corona suggestions. The idea of a code is sort of to act as an anchor or a compass, if you like, you know, when you're in choppy waters, or hold on, when you go to the edges of the map, because pirates always boldly go where others fear to tread. And this is where we shall go next, off to the edges. And this is what they used to write on old maps: here there be dragons. But this is a really important point as we sit in a moment where we get to reevaluate and we get to potentially reinvent ourselves. There's this mass scramble at the moment to everybody putting their business online, including me. But the question will be, you know, who does it well? And I think that the people who will really thrive now is those who seek out inspiration from some more unusual places. So, and that's really what, you know, is off the edges of the map, in the darkness. And I get quite frustrated when I hear companies saying, you know, we need to be more creative, we need to be transformative, we need to be innovative, without really, telling people how to get to the edges, and also consistently rewarding conformity instead of creativity. So what I'm trying to achieve with the book is to give some sort of practical steps to how do you go off the edges of the map if everything around you is kind of pushing you towards norms or the mainstream. So the first suggestion I would have is to tackle the taboos and the skeletons in your closet. So figure out what nobody is talking about. Maybe the things that get swept under the carpet or just feel a little bit too scary to say, and find a way to raise them. So I've used an example here from an organisation that's done this really well, who's sort of in our crew. This is the Child's Rights International Network. They were one of the first organisations to send us a pirate code as well. And what they did, what they discovered from creating their pirate code was that as an NGO, they'd really stopped challenging anything. In fact, they'd fallen into the trap that a lot of charities do, where they just end up going for the same funding as everybody else and are really just saying all the same things. So they decided to take a stand and to start campaigning on some much more taboo topics in the field of children's rights. So now they campaign against sterilisation of children with learning disabilities. They campaign against forced virginity testing, and they're campaigning to lower the voting age. Now, all of these are topics that other charities just wouldn't touch with a barge pole. But the interesting thing is that the risk has brought reward, because their funders have actually reinstated their support, because now it feels like they really stand for something. So it's a way of kind of not only reasserting your values, but also just standing out from the crowd. And it's worth remembering that everything that we now consider to be normal was once a kind of peripheral vision. So that's why, you know, going there and going to those taboo or those sensitive subjects can be worth it just in the beginning as an exploration. The second point is a practical one, actually. It pays to actively schedule in some time to think disruptively. If you think you're going to get radical thinking just by kind of having your normal meeting and saying, come on, everybody, think of some, you know, more radical or some more creative ideas, like, that doesn't usually happen. The example here I've got is Sony, who decided to schedule monthly fuck shit up meetings. The swearing isn't compulsory, but it does kind of help sometimes to signal that this is going to be different. And what it is, it's just some protected time every month to really kind of just throw some wildcard ideas out there, and give people that space to go, okay, you know, let's just see what comes up, without the usual constraints of kind of normal meeting time. And the final point I want to make on this, which is important, is everybody's edges of the map is different. It really, your distance from the mainstream will be different to other people's. So it's worth not judging where other people are. Because as much as I want to encourage some bolder thinking, pirates are also always practical, and you need to be you still need to be realistic. There's no point in having fantastical ideas if you can't really make them real. And the examples I've got here are what I call our education pirates. So each one of these groups is trying to challenge mainstream education, but they all are in totally different positions. So Tej on the right here is an entrepreneur. He's created this whole new system for learning, and he takes that into schools. So he has to be quite cautious about how he does it, because he's got to create relationships with teachers and schools. So how challenging he can be sometimes a bit limited. Felicity at the top has created a Pirates in Higher Education group within her university in Wales. Now she's got a bit of a crew, and they've got some scope to do some quite different things within her department, but she also has to make some compromises because obviously she's working within the university structure and she's trying to get some resources and help to build her campaign. And down at the bottom here is YouThink, which is an alternative studio school in Adelaide, Australia, who I would consider to be the first real pirate school, who have got a totally different approach to education. It's really, really holistic. But their problem isn't that they can't stay pirate, it's that every time they, maybe recruit a new staff member who's been at a more traditional institution, they can't quite, sometimes they'll, come in and sort of end up being more traditional. And so they're always trying to like protect their pirate because they are sort of like a self-contained unit. So it's just a point that the edges of the map is different to everybody. And so some people's pirate will look quite different to you, to yours even. And in summary, tackle the taboos, seek out the skeletons, make time for business to be unusual, and know your distance from the mainland and adjust tactics accordingly. So my next question to you, and usually I would ask the question, what are you afraid of? Because that's usually a good indicator of where the edges of your map is. But now we're in this coronavirus moment and a lot of things feel scary. What I really want to try and get at is that kind of stretch zone, that place where it feels scary, but there's also some real potential. So the question I'm actually going to ask you for your quick type form question is, what at the moment are you avoiding doing or talking about? As this might be a good indicator as to where there is some potential. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds. Ish, 30 seconds ish. Okay, moving on. All good? Okay. So the second, we're into the last bit now, but probably the second most important thing that a pirate has after the code is the crew. Because if you're going to go off the edges of the map, having a crew to hold you accountable is essential, whether it's to push you to go a bit further or to hold you back if you're going a bit too radical. The crew is, absolutely tantamount. I'm going to do a quick shout out to Be More Pirate crew here. Here's some of the people in it. Put some random ones in there, but also I know we've got a few on the call today. So hi, Barry and Lefteris and Tony. I really wouldn't have gotten through this lockdown had I not had the chance to talk to people in our crew. And our crew is really more like a fleet. It's lots of people with their crews of their own out in the world. And so I've started to learn a lot about how to build a crew basically from them. And one of the first things I learned about crew building, as opposed to a crew being like a tribe or just a team, is that you're really aiming for diversity, because you're trying to essentially, usually crews rally to problem solve something. So you're looking for people who share your values, but don't share your view. And by view, I mean your perspective, your position. So you're looking for people at different levels from different backgrounds who can bring like a totally new insight on the problem. One crew that we that have just grown exponentially is something that is called the Artistic Mutiny, and it's headed up by a woman called Sarah Shedd. Sarah is an independent artist, and she one day she's worked in the arts for 20 odd years, and she helps other artists sort of get funding for their projects. And one day, after a long day, she got together with a few of her people she was working on a project with, and they had dinner, and she'd been reading Be More Pirate, and she said, you know, I've been reading this book and I'm really fed up with how unfair it is in the arts sector when it comes to the allocation of funding. And she said, I'm thinking about really challenging this. I've been reading this book. Is anyone interested in joining me? And the people at dinner were like, yeah, we'll do it. A couple of days later, she set up a Facebook page. Initially, they had 5 or so in it. A week later, she had 95. A month later, she had 400. And now she's at over 800. Getting together to sort of challenge the way that arts funding is shared out. So I'm learning quite a lot from Sarah. And also going back to Kath and the MCC Pirates, because they have a slightly different setting. They're a bit more constricted because they're working within an organisation. And so what I've learned from Kath is that it really, really pays, if you want to change anything, to A, meet outside of normal hours, B, do it in really, really informal, but ideally inspiring settings if you can, because you're trying to shake people free from the usual constraints. But the most important thing that Kath has said is that when she got up to about 20 people in her crew, they started to attract more attention from within the organisation. But the original crew had really, really done some key work together and started to form some really, really strong bonds. And there was quite a strong feeling that actually they didn't really want to let anybody else in. And she said that it's funny because one of our core values feels like it should be inclusiveness, but actually the time came that it was important to close some doors in order to protect the connections that we had. And that's something that's come up in all the crews that I have talked to, is that it doesn't really matter about the numbers. What matters is the strength of the connections between people. Too often we focus in networks about growing the numbers, but if you really want to achieve some change, it's the relationships that are going to, the relationships underpinning it that are going to matter. And I finally want to give a sort of shout out to a Scottish pirate who's done some brilliant work on crew building online, which might be what we all really, really need now. So Dr. Tammy Watchhorn has for years been pioneering a way of collaborating and working together to problem solve online. And she has taken her inspiration directly from Be More Pirate and Pirate Crews. And she works on this platform called Cube, which she initially was using in the NHS to try and get, people from all kinds of departments, project managers, nurses, surgeons, all together to work much quicker on a problem. And I've been really, really fascinated to learn about Tammy's approach and why this is working, particularly for now. And she said a couple of things. First is that the kind of surreal setting of the virtual space really helps to dismantle hierarchy. So although you have people of much more senior positions working with, people in more junior roles, this kind of unusual setting seems to take away those usual power dynamics. Secondly, they have a rule that you always have to write before you can talk. So that makes people think before they speak. And she says that, the problem with digital transformation is that we're just shoving everybody online without really giving consideration to what really works when it comes to collaboration. You can't just put everyone on a platform and assume that the culture will translate. You actually have to create an entirely new culture online. And that's what she works on. So I've been really fascinated to see how she's been applying the crew building through the coronavirus days. And I guess there's one final point that I've noticed, again, in all the crews, which is about leadership. The leadership that I've witnessed emerging out of pirate crews, and it's still there. It's not so flat that there is no leader, but the leader is the person who is best connected. Not the person with the vision, not the person with the answers or the experience or the strategy, but the person who is the best at building relationships. They seem to have emerged as a natural leader in all the crews that I have been working with. So, quick summary: how to build a good crew. Find people who share your values and not your viewpoint. Close doors and focus on connections instead. Meet outside of normal hours and places. And enable leadership without hierarchy. So I'm going to ask you, not who is in your crew, but who's got your back, because these are the people who should be in your crew. So there's a quick fire question. I'm going to give you just another 20 seconds. Okay, now moving on. So I've talked for quite a long time now, I feel, and I can feel my voice echoing off the walls of my room. And it's time for me to stop talking, because pirates have neither time for indirectness or inaction. It is time for us to talk about some action, some rule breaking. I really liked all the suggestions that came up earlier about what we might want to instill values-wise in society after this coronavirus time. But we want to get down to some actual practical steps. There's often too big a gap between our ambitions and what we can actually put into practice day to day. So that's what I want to get us to. So we're going to talk about we're going to get to some rule breaking and rule making. First, quick question. This is just your rapid fire question, because I want to get your gut instinct on what you could do differently. So answer this in the type form now, and then we're going to move into breakout rooms in under a minute.
And if anyone's got any recommendation for music for the people that don't go to the breakout room, I am taking recommendations for sea shanties. Just type them in the chat.
Okay, so I'm moving on the question. So what I want to talk about in the breakout rooms is not what your grand ambition might be, not what the values you want to hold on to are, but what could we actually do together? And I'm putting it into the suggestion of a small, bold action, because in all the best examples in history show that if you take a small, bold action, sometimes it can be enough to incite other people to follow you. So what is small enough, manageable enough, achievable enough that you could maybe take tomorrow or next week that would feel a little bit outside of the comfort zone, that maybe would get some attention or create some impact, whether it's, sending that email you've been putting off sending because it's going to cause some ripples, or I don't know, a lot of the time it is just asking the question that you've been too afraid to ask. So I want to hear some suggestions on what we could actually really do as individuals. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen finally, and I'm going to hand over to Babs to put you guys into the breakout rooms.
Okie dokie, here we go, guys. And again, I'm just going to pause that.
I don't think Babs has left that room for the last 9 weeks. Every time I see her, she's in that room.
Alex, did you see the picture when you came back there? That was Paolo was showing us his Be More Pirate wall.
That's great. Yeah, that's brilliant. So I'm just going to ask you guys, yeah, put it on to back onto. I know we're running over time. That's me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just to cover that, we'll do the slides, which will cover the questions. We'll then go into really short community shout out. Then we'll go to Q&A. If you've got questions, stay. We can always go a bit longer. If you've got commitments and you want to do something else, that's fine to drop out as well. Yeah, it's completely. Don't feel you have to stay in a meeting at any point in your life. That's my motto.
No. Cool. So, thoughts on that? Was that difficult to answer? Did anyone come up with anything they'd like to share?
Yeah, we did. And for anyone that's not been to Australia, here's a version of a very broad Aussie accent for you. So we agreed on running the FSU, and not just once, like embedding the FSU, embracing non-formal conversation, and being open to experiment.
Great, great. Anybody else like to share? I think, Shelby, you should tell. Oh, she's gone.
I'll quickly share. I really like the comments that you made about exploring the edges of the map, and so that's something I'd like to do is to help others in the organisation that are at the edge of the map now, maybe don't know it, and they are exploring. They continue to explore, and understand that it's good to be here, and not just when you're in a crisis.
Yeah. Great.
Shoulders back.
Anyone? Just unmute yourself if you want to speak, of course.
What did you say, Deepak?
Shelby had an interesting one and she stepped away, but it looks like she's back now. Shelby, are you going to tell us yours?
Yeah.
You're on mute, Shelby.
I am on mute, yeah. So I had a great chat in my little room. Yeah, it was fantastic. So the outcome of ours was that I have finally been persuaded to do my podcast, and it will be, I've got to deliver, well, not deliver it, but it will be around hopefully by the end of May. No, not will be. It definitely will be by the end of May. So, yeah, it was about believing in my instinct and just doing it, doing something, putting myself out there.
I'll listen.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'll switch back. There's only like 2 more things I'm going to ask of you before we go to Q&A. So, gone small board action. So at the beginning of this session, you'll remember that I shared that email from Jill, who emailed me at the end of the talk in Edinburgh, and she said that she took a picture of this scrolling graphic. So that's what I want you to do. I would like you to take a picture on your phone or a screenshot and find out what your be more is. This is just for fun. And I'll just wait 2 minutes to do that. Okay, is everyone good? And then the final type form questions. First of all, fill in your be more. What are you going to be more of as you go forward? What has the universe given you? And then finally, the last question, I think it's the last question, is just to reflect on how you're feeling now. Are you feeling any better, any worse? Hopefully not. Any different to the beginning of this session? And then at the end, it will ask you to add your email address. And what I will do is I'll email you all the answers to your questions as a reflection of the session. and probably a quick note from me. So I'm going to stop sharing that and head back over. Does that make sense to everybody? The final, yeah, great. And the only thing is to say thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the time this evening. I guess it's most people's evenings, so thank you for listening. And I'll hand over to Scott for questions, I think. You're on mute, Scott.
Oh, sorry, I was typing my email in. Right, what we'll do now is, if you've got any questions, type them in the chat with the word question in front, and then Babs will look after that. Whilst we're gathering those questions, is there any events coming up, any community shout outs, anything we want to cover off? Anyone? Just one for me. There's going to be a memorial for Martin next Wednesday. So Martin Burns, who many in the group will know. If you want to come to that, just let me know and I'll send you the link. There's going to be tickets. Yeah. What's our next talk, Donald or Sath?
Next one's David Snowden.
One of the series. Yeah.
Yeah, the second one of the series from Dave Snowden. Yeah.
Okay.
It's next Wednesday.
Does this one maybe contain strong views in politics?
Yeah, I suspect so, yes. I mean, that last one was well received. There was a lot of interesting things got covered. No, the other one, Scott, just quickly, is not everybody will know, but the team at Agile Scotland announced early bird tickets for the next conference in June. Yeah. So that's only just happened. Saw that on Twitter. So yeah, if you're interested in that,
why don't you have a word? Yeah, why don't you have a word with Mark, and we could probably get a discount code.
Yeah, we'll do that. But just to make folk aware that that's now, yeah, early bird tickets are available for that.
And I'm kind of assuming that's going to be virtual.
Sorry. What's the conference?
Agile Scotland.
It's the Agile Scotland.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's usually a good one. I had we'll see what happens for that one. I know Agile Manchester is happening remote. It's another one, so you can actually, wherever you are in the world, you can get that one, and it's run by the same people. Mark Delgarno.
Scott, just want to add the Agile Manchester, they're actually offering it at a pay what you like as well.
Yeah, and that's nice. Obviously, their costs are less. Where we are, we're going to be taking leave and doing it in stages. So I'm going to take some leave and go to that. So excellent.
Are you allowed to move about in Scotland? We're still in lockdown.
No, we're still in lockdown, but it'll be on Zoom.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So if you want to stay up all night, you can listen to it. Excellent. Right. Questions and answers. I'm going to hand over to Babs. Take it home.
So no questions coming up so far. Any last burning questions from the crowd? This is your chance.
Yes. When will How to Be More Pirate come out?
In September.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Alex, what's apart from bringing out the book, what other big projects are you involved with that you'd like to share with us?
So what have I been doing? Well, most of the time that Sam and I spend is working with different companies, organizations, either a bit of consultancy and some, well, I think we call it consultancy, mutiny mentoring, let's call it, or doing workshops with them. So that's all been kind of like sporadic work. A lot of it stopped obviously now because of this. So although we've got a couple of things that are online, the next big project we're going to do is we will start a podcast. We're going to try and get that off the ground in the next, I know, I didn't even mention that, in the next, I'd say 2 months is realistic. So really,
what's that going to be about specifically?
That will be on how to be more pirate, but what we're going to do is we've got a long list of people to interview, and it will be really about kind of gleaning that practical inspiration from people who've maybe had slightly more unusual life experiences, who've really started something, broken some rules, but maybe not going for the obvious, let's say. So it will be, let's say, 1 part inspiration, 2 parts action, hopefully, with a bit of pirate history at the beginning. We'll kind of give you a different pirate story every week. I think that's as far as I've got, basically. We haven't totally planned it all out yet, but yeah.
Cool, excellent. We've got a question here from Tom. So given the switch to working from home, is being a pirate the new normal, as in traditional command and control management is in deep hibernation?
I'd say so. What seems to have come up is that people are listening to their managers less because lack of physical proximity just enables us to be more in control of our schedules, and I definitely feel that people feel that they have more agency over their schedules, and are starting to take the permission that they wouldn't usually have. So even, I'm hearing things like, I'm giving myself that hour in the morning to just go for a walk instead of answering all the emails from my boss at 8 a.m. So there feels like, because there's this new normal, people are definitely seizing a level of permission. Yes, that's how I would answer that.
Anything else from the crowd? From the crew, even?
Crew.
Just another question, if you don't mind, while we've got you, Alex. Really enjoyed some of your other talks as I caught up and prepared for today. When you have people on those very different edges, can you tell us more about sort of what specific activities you might do to try and bring them closer together?
Do you mean bringing people together in a group, or do you mean?
So they're in the group, but they're part of a team that pre-exists, and they're wanting to do some transformational things to be more pirate. But some people are, like me, I'm quite keen to change things and do that. But other people are kind of much further down that scale than me, perhaps. So, when there's that sort of polar opposites, what sort of techniques do you use there?
Yeah, I'd say that, like, we always start with that, the idea of agreeing upon principles and values and a code, because it has to stem from that point. Rather than starting to the point of what people disagree on in terms of action, like what are the points of overlap, and it's quite useful, I think, to often to get people around some ambitions for the team or the company that they do agree upon, and you kind of work backwards from there, I'd say. Yeah, I mean, actually, I don't know if he's still on here. Barry, are you still on here? Maybe not. Can't see it. No. So one of the examples that I give in the book, from a guy called Barry, who was on the call earlier, he did some work at the Open University, and he had a project that he was trying to get off the ground, getting loads of different parts of the university to work and really transform an area of the kind of IT software. But getting academics to work with, the marketing team and the software developers is quite challenging, because they're all coming at it from different angles. And what he did is he said, okay, we're going to deliberately create a challenger group. We're going to air all the issues straight away. We're not going to pretend that there isn't going to be any conflict here. We're going to address it like right from the off. And actually he gave people specific roles to say, like, your job is to question and to challenge, and sort of just invite it in a bit more. So that, he found that doing that enabled them to begin to unpick why they'd each come to that conclusion. So it wasn't that, they all had most of the time we all have a vested interest in the success of the project. It's just that we're just looking at it from our personal perspective. So helping people to understand why and where they were coming from was really critical. So I think that's quite a good technique to use to, like, create a challenger group.
Cool. We've got a really good question here from Joyce. Any advice for introducing Be More Pirate to a new and remote team?
Yeah, I get asked me to come and introduce it. I get asked that quite a lot, and from the very beginning, Sam and I have always talked about the need to create some resources that are a bit more digestible than asking people to just read a book. So I'd say maybe getting people to watch one of the online talks to just get a flavour for it, rather than trying to go through the whole book. Although I can send everyone an audiobook if they would like. So yeah, I think that usually when we've introduced Be More Pirate, usually we get asked to come in and talk about it actually, and do a sort of more interactive live session, because it's definitely the more engaging way. But it depends on whether she wants to introduce Be More Pirate as, you know, the book and the concept, or just the principles behind being pirate.
Yeah, I'm not too sure, Alex. It's just, you know, I think that we're in a situation where we're having to form lots of new teams that are all remotely, that have never sort of met each other. And a lot of what you said today was really appealing in terms of building a kind of code amongst the people involved. So that's maybe just going away and having a look at those videos might be a really good place for us to start.
Yeah, and you know, feel free to email me if you want any like help, if you want to talk about it more, or you want any help on how to approach it.
Yeah.
That probably would take a bit of time to think about it. And I'll just get my email address in here. But yeah, it does. Yeah, it depends a little bit on what the appetite of the team is, how big the team is, that sort of thing.
Brilliant. Thank you.
But I'm going to try and work on some kind of online, some better online digestible resources, and maybe even a course. That's sort of in the future.
The way to go.
Yeah, no, I know. Right?
Brilliant. Thank you.
That was great there. So we have run over by a little bit, so now feels like a good time to wrap it up. So just massive thank you to Alex for that. That was fantastic. And thank you to everybody for your great questions and taking part. Big round of applause for Alex.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay. And please, if you haven't yet, complete your form and send it to me. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks very much, guys. And hopefully see you next Wednesday.
Hey, I will end.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
So.
Well done.
Yes, I'll stop the recording.